It's Radio Free 501c, the podcast of Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm Cecilia Sepp, your host. Welcome to Season 7. This week, we're continuing our trend of first-time guests with my friends Anuja and Barry Pilson. You probably know both of them. If you don't, you should. They're here to talk with me about ageism in the hiring process. Yes, it's out there, and we're going to discuss it. It's Monday, June 9th, 2025. Welcome to episode 288. Monday, June 9th. That means it's time for another episode of Radio Free 501c, brought to you by Rogue Tulips Consulting. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Cecilia Sepp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips. And I want to remind you, if you haven't subscribed or followed us yet on your favorite podcast service, please do. We're everywhere you can find us. We're having a whole series of fantastic conversations this year. We're only halfway through the year. We also are on a trend of first-time guests on our podcast. So I'm very excited to invite two of my friends, Barry Pilson and Anuja here this week. And we're going to be talking about a very serious subject, ageism in the hiring process. But before we jump into that, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to our global audience, wherever you may be. Now, we're here to talk about ageism. As I said, it affects everybody. Somebody mentioned to me, it affects young people too, because younger people are the victims of ageism on the other side of the spectrum. Unfortunately, it seems to be a bigger issue as we get past 35. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But first, I am going to throw it over to Anuja to say hello to the global audience and tell us a little about yourself. Welcome, Anuja.
Well, thank you so much, Cecilia, for the opportunity to be here with you as well as Barry this morning, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be. My name is Anuja Miner. I have been working in the nonprofit association world for almost 30 plus years. My background, I've done everything starting out, as an admin assistant. I had no idea what associations were. And now I'm a membership expert, and I've worked in, various sectors of association world, farmers, helicopters, and I've always come back to my root, which is membership. I love making a difference in people's lives. And so I'm happy to be here today. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you. And Barry, what about yourself? Can you tell us a little about you?
Sure, happy to do that, Anuja and Cecilia. Barry Pilson, and I have been in the higher education and nonprofit world, which are very similar, for 30 plus years, starting first in higher education, then moving slowly into associations. And I certainly didn't fall into associations. I knew what it was about and knew what I was getting into from a previous conversation that this group was having, actually. And some would say that it's a calling. And I think as I've gone through this, it definitely is. And I've been focused on marketing communications, but under that for me has always been membership and business development, and in some cases IT and the tech that goes along with all that sort of stuff, and sort of been growing and doing that for years in the sector, as well as sort of working at times independently as a consultant, which I'm sort of doing now. And now I'm at the point, and we'll talk about this further, sort of the next phase and where that's going. And for me, it's real estate, but more to come.
Yes, and well, and that's great summary of your background, Barry. Thank you. And Barry referenced a conversation we've had previously. The three of us are in a virtual networking group that meets pretty much every day during the week, except some major holidays. If you'd like more information about that, reach out to any of us offline, and we'll be happy to tell you more about the Association Community Exchange. So this conversation today came from a LinkedIn post I did several weeks ago about ageism. And I just did a short poll about, hey, why do you think older people aren't getting hired? The people who responded all said because our salaries are too high once we get past 40. I don't know if it's just that. I think there's a lot of wrong ideas out there about people over 40. But what I thought was especially amusing was that a lot of the 40-year-olds or early 40 people are like, hey, that's not old. But I use that age because that's what the Age Discrimination and Employment Act addresses as people 40 and up. So we refer to what we have. So Barry, I'm going to start with you. You've been looking for your next opportunity in a full-time position for a while. So can you tell us a little about that?
Sure. And I have to say that my experiences with sort of what I think are ageism it's been going on for the probably past 10 years, in different scenarios, depending on sort of what the job is. And um, while I can't obviously pinpoint and say, oh, this was it, it was clear to me that in applying for certain jobs, either they look at the amount of stuff on your resume, and decide right away, yeah, I can't afford you, right? Even though more and more salaries are being posted, and so um, you would think that that doesn't become an issue. But what I've noticed is either I'm not getting responses, and I think, okay, is this my resume? Is it, I've gone through all the things that you go through to figure out why you're not getting responses from people. What is it, my cover letters? Is it the way I'm presenting myself? A whole slew of things. And I was getting interviews and getting responses. And I think part of what's happening is there's a lot of things. It's not just Asia, but it's also how employers are just dealing with job searches too, right? Um, and so I get interviews and never hear anything, which I always thought was rude.
Yeah.
And in some cases, the search is disbanded and started again, right? And so I don't know if that's ageism or if that's just I got caught in a web there, right?
Mhm.
Um, but when I look at the people that get hired from things that I didn't get, it's clear to me that something's going on there. And while I can't say, oh my God, yeah, you discriminated against me because I'm a white male and I'm old, right?
No.
And I did. It's been about 10 years, and I've started feeling that. I think in my 40s I didn't at all, partly because and I should say this, when I was younger, I always thought I looked too young and I wasn't getting jobs because I looked like I was still in my early 20s or something like that. And they wanted people that were, yeah, so you go through this phase, and I feel like I could work another 20 years. I have the energy and everything else, but when people look at you on paper, and see different things, they're like, yeah, look at this person, similar, but only 10 years.
Maybe not. Yeah. And that's a good point. And there's a lot we can unpack in this episode. So I'm hoping to get to at least three of the things we can unpack. So, but let's draw Anuja into the conversation. So, can you share some of your story?
Yeah, and one of the things I think has shifted quite a bit, at least I've noticed, is in the last 5 years since COVID, I think there's been a huge shift on, both employers, what they're looking for, and employees, what they're looking for, right? And one of the things that Barry mentioned is the person that's hiring, the hiring manager or the CEO, majority of the time, they're going to be my age, because they've been in that role for a very, very long time, so they may have started in their career or in that role. Maybe they became CEO when they turned 50. So I think sometimes it's difficult to sit on, the other side of it and while you're interviewing, because you're a lot of the times talking to somebody that's your age and they're going to be discriminating you. And, I've had the reverse where I look young, but I'm also not young. And, I feel like I've had to reinvent myself quite a bit in the last, 5 years, which is when with COVID, that's when sort of my professional trajectory started changing a little bit. And I reinvented myself. I've redone my resume multiple times, but I don't see that switch on the hiring manager or the HR side where they're not changing the way they're looking at, what they're not tracking, how they're interviewing or how they're reviewing the resume. So I think it's been I've noticed a shift since COVID where people have just become more, there are more people looking for opportunities, right? And so am I going to hire somebody that has 20 years of experience for a salary that's probably going to be outside of her range? Or am I going to hire somebody that's, half their age for half the salary, right? So giving up experience and historical data knowledge for somebody that's going to come in and they may not stay in the role also. So, I think the one thing with hiring somebody that's a little bit older is that, they're going to bring the dedication every single day. They're going to stay at the organization for much longer.
Yes. Well, and I think there's that. We can't guarantee how long anyone will stay at an organization, but I want to build on that because this is a thing that's always bothered me since people start saying this. I first noticed this like 15 or so years ago. Well, I don't mind hiring a young person and training them and just keeping them for 2 or 3 years and having their energy, and then they go on. Well, you're basically spending time and money and resources training someone else's employee, if that's your attitude. Now,
Right.
one of the things I've heard about not hiring older people is, well, they might retire in a few years. Wouldn't you rather invest in someone who's already trained, experienced, has knowledge, doesn't need a huge onboarding process? They know how to talk on the phone, for example, or write an email. You don't need to teach them a lot of the basic stuff. Wouldn't you rather have that for 3 years instead of somebody that you're spending the whole 3 years training? So I think that's a different perspective shift we need to address. Like you said, Anuja, how are we reading resumes? And like you also said, Barry, they're looking at the resume and seeing all the stuff, but then they're immediately assuming you don't want the job because you want more money. But on the other hand, if we're posting salary ranges and an experienced person says, well, gee, I just need to be able to pay my rent, it's really, we don't go into nonprofits to get rich at any age, right? So what are some of the positives? And I'm going to flip this back over to you, Barry. We've touched on some of these. What are some of the other positives about hiring an experienced applicant as opposed to somebody who maybe only has a couple years?
So I'll address that in a second, but Anusha said something that I wanted to bring out more because this experience happened to me. I'm sure this is what it was, that you're interviewing with someone that's significant, 10 years younger than you in a senior position. And I don't know if they're wondering why you're applying for this position, although we've had that discussion, but are they worried about that I might have better experience and know more, or taking their job or something like that. And those are silly things, but I totally I see that in the questions that I'm getting asked and things like that. So now, but I wanted to share that because I think that that's why I have not been in some cases applying for top senior positions, right? I've been applying for something lower because um, this is what I want to do. I want to make an impact somehow. And so I think that's the positive stuff, right? Here, you're going to get a person that has been through the mill, if you will, that doesn't want to be the big boss, but wants to be there to help and support and share and mentor if that's what happens. And I think that's the positive stuff that us old folks, us longtime experienced folks bring to a scenario. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I've hired what some would consider older folks, and it works out great. They're easy, generally, you're right, easy onboarding. You don't have to sit there and sort of watch over them to make sure that they understand what they're doing or taking initiative and things like that, which are all the things that you want in a good employee. And so, yeah, I think those are some good things. And one more thing, because you mentioned this too, I remember years ago hiring a staff person that was from out of town and wanted to come to Washington, D.C. And my boss said, oh, I think they're just going to come here so they can leap into a job at these other kinds of organizations because that's where they were at now. And I thought, well, then what's the point? And I thought, no. And of course, hired this person, stayed 6 or 7 years, never did go work at one of, in fact, stayed in associations. So that's typically what'll happen. Once they get to associations, they're like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't know about this. So just wanted to share
That's
that.
why we're all still here. It's like we
Exactly.
get drawn in.
Yeah.
So, well, Anisha, what do you think are some of the benefits of enhancing the multi-generational workplace?
I think some of it is, our knowledge base is, we have an X amount of knowledge base, but with changes in technology, with changes in, the environment, I think we are also putting the time and effort into learning new skill sets. So even if we may not have the skill set that somebody's looking for, right? We all look at the job description and say, okay, check, I have this, I have this, I have this. Well, I don't have this. So we take the time and effort to learn the new skill set. For me, I'll use myself as an example is, in the last 5 years, again, with the trajectory of my career, I've done so many new things that I'm not sure I would have had the opportunity or taken the opportunity for that matter to learn new skill set, to develop, certain areas of my professional career. And I think we're also not influenced by a lot of, social media. I have social media, but I don't use that as a way to live my life, or just because this person is suggesting you should do this, does it fit my criteria? Does it fit, what I'm looking for? So I think that we've been able to, well, I shouldn't say and Barry, I don't want to speak for you, but I've been able to learn new skills and meet new people. Networking has also been such a great part of going through this and knowing that others are in the same situation as you are, but you're sort of learning from other people too. Like, hey, could I do this differently? Can I do this differently? Should I do this instead of this? So I think we're also not afraid to speak to other people about challenges instead of dealing with it, via social media.
Well,
It's
and
go ahead,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Barry.
A few years ago, probably about five years ago, I was worried about that people might see me as not keeping up with the trends, and I'm like, all right, that's when I got my digital marketing certificate, which takes you ahead of the trends and everything else. I wanted to keep doing things and adding certifications and things to my resume, so people knew that I didn't stop, right, and that I fully understood the new technologies and everything that was sort of happening. And then there's that piece about cultural fit, right? That people are always so worried about. And I remember interviewing with groups that had a fairly younger staff, and I thought, oh, they're going to think I'm not going to be a cultural fit for them. And the problem with cultural fit is not being all the same, right? There's a difference between culture. Yeah, so you want, just because you don't look like them or sound like them or have that experience doesn't mean that you're not going to be a cultural fit, right? And I think there's two kinds of fits, and so there's that diversity of knowledge and diversity of age that's real important if you're going to have a non-homogeneous group, right? That's going to be able to really move the organization forward. And I think a lot of groups get that, but some maybe hiring managers don't.
May I add
That's a
something?
really good point, Barry, because culture is complementary. It's
Mhm.
not homogeneous. So
Right.
we all need to be able to fit into that cultural mindset that we have. So, and Anuja, you were starting to add a comment.
Yes, I'm sorry. And we also have to be mindful of who we represent. No matter what industry you're in, you have folks that are from all sorts of backgrounds. You have US members, you have international members. Understanding them and having that diversity, you have to be strong in your conviction, but at the same time, you have to be mindful of who you're representing, the industry you're representing, and having that diverse background certainly gets you to understand your member and what they're going through, so that empathy piece is really, really important, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and know that, their issue may be something different than somebody else's issue.
Yes. And that's a very good point. And I also want to address the issue of looking for jobs that maybe are like, let's say, director level, because you need a certain amount of experience, but it's not C suite or maybe a senior level like a VP. I think sometimes people say, what's wrong with this person over 40 applying for a director job? There's nothing wrong with them. They just don't want to be in that stressful C-suite job anymore. They've done it. They've been there, done that. They want to contribute, but let's open these slots up for other people to have leadership opportunities. What do you both think about that?
That's exactly sort of where my thinking has been. Because, and I hate to admit this out loud in front of the whole world, but you know what? I, I, I've done all these sort of political stuff as being in the C-suite and all the evaluation, staff evaluations and everything else. And I don't want to do that anymore. I just want to do the work. And if there's strategy involved, great. But to have to deal with 20 staff and everything else, I'd prefer not to have to do that anymore. I put my time in. And there are other people that want to do that and want to move up. The other thing I'll say too is there are times though when you actually don't have the experience or the right background and you have to know when you just aren't the right person for that job or whatever too. And I think that's the other side of this. At some point you start saying everything is ageism, and well, no, it's not that. It's also you, in some cases. So you have to understand yourself. You also have to understand yourself enough in the position you're applying for and listening to what the hiring manager is saying to figure out if in fact wait, maybe I'm not right for this position. So
That's
there's
right. Yeah. And I think, when you're over 40, we'll keep using the ADEA
right.
measure there. So if you're over 40, you don't want to make that same mistake some younger people make of just applying for every single job.
Yeah.
Right.
You want to be a little choosier, you want to be a little pickier. And I think we probably also have to work on our elevator speech, as we call it, a little and hone it a little more about, well, you're over 40. Why do you want to be a department director again? Well, because I really just want to do the content work and be part of a team. I don't feel the need to have the big title in the big office because I've already done that. I've had that experience. I want a new experience because that's what keeps us all fresh, as you mentioned earlier, Anuja. So, Anuja, what are your thoughts on that about maybe sometimes we just want to focus on membership?
Right. I think some of it is that we've sort of pigeonholed ourselves into fitting, like having that title, right? A specific title, whether it's a director, whether it's a VP, or whether it's an executive director. And I think titles over the last 5+ years have also changed. There's so many different titles now that I can't even keep up. So is it a ego thing for me or for Barry or for you that, hey, I used to be executive director, I'm not executive director anymore? Is it something that we put on the pressure we put on ourselves, or is it something we want to showcase to the rest of the world that, well, look, I'm an executive director. I may not be good at being an executive director, but I have the title. So to Barry's point, right, recently I had a conversation with an old colleague of mine, and there's a CEO role that's open in the organization. And I asked him, why aren't you applying? Because I know he has the background, he had the experience. And he said to me, he said, I'm good at what I do. I'm really great at my job now. I'm not sure I have all the qualification to do the CEO role. So I'm not going to put my hat in, in the pool. And to me, it was really interesting because to what Barry's point was, there a lot of people feel like they want the title, even though they may not be eligible to do play the role, and dealing with employees takes a certain amount of skill set. So just because you have the CEO or executive title, or even a mom or a dad, that just because you have the title doesn't necessarily mean you have all the tools to be able to effectually do your job to the level that that particular position requires.
Although
That's
I
right.
would say, I would say, initially, your friend, I don't know who you're talking about or anything else, but there's also a certain level of imposter syndrome there that you've got
No,
to work through, and we all have it, and you've really got to find ways to sort of work through that too, particularly as you get older, right?
exactly.
It's that becomes more the monster sort of in the back of your head, about okay, well maybe I'm not
And
this.
the flip side of that is there are a lot of leaders, CEOs, and whether it's in our political realm, whether it's in corporate, whether it's in nonprofits, that they feel that they are the perfect person to do the job, even though we see the trail of destruction that they leave behind, and but no one else is willing to speak up to say, no, you are not right for that role. So the flip side of that, even though there are people that are in positions of power, may not belong there, but nobody's willing to speak up to say that they should not be in power.
Well, I think you especially see that in nonprofit organizations. We
Absolutely.
don't see people speaking up, but one of the problems is this: there's no one to go to because you
Correct.
really, as a staff person, cannot go around the chief staff executive to the board, and you shouldn't do that. If
Right.
the board's not seeing poor performance at the CSE level, there's really not a mechanism in place right now for that. That's a whole other project, a whole other
Right.
episode about that,
But
because
it, but it,
CSEs don't have anyone to go to either when they're being
but if that's
persecuted,
time, yeah, if that's
right?
tying with someone that's older, it gets really complicated, I think.
Yes, exactly. And there's so much liability around everything within the workplace. We have to be very cautious about how we do things, but we're also told not to burn bridges either.
And
Although some bridges should be burned and blown up and just don't. But that's another. I have like 3
That's another
episode
podcast.
ideas
Yeah.
from
yeah, and I
today.
think
Right?
one of the ACE calls, we talked about this, right? We're constantly doing professional development, but at the C-suite level, or we talk about the boards, helping the board sort of get them to see what their role, what the impact that they're going to have. But we don't do that for our leadership. We don't stop and say to the CEO, you need to take some professional development. You need to learn how to be a leader. You need to learn how to, manage people. And we don't do that. And I think it goes back to what you said, Cecilia, is that, unless you speak up, and it's really hard to circumvent that conversation unless you are going to, alienate
Which makes
yourself.
it harder for people like us
Yeah,
wanting to get those jobs because they just don't understand the dynamic. So,
correct.
That's right. Well, and then that brings us to the other issue of hiring somebody from the profession or industry to run the association and not hiring an association management professional. And that's another issue that we come upon because they feel like, well, okay, I used to work at an association for otolaryngologists, and they always hire an otolaryngologist to run the association. You want to know why? Because they can take your head apart and put it back together. So they think running an association is easy. But what I used to say to them is, you wouldn't hire me to do ear surgery. I wouldn't hire you to run an association.
and
Because
and
they're
that's
two very
fair. I
different.
mean, the smart organizations though will hire a COO to do the,
Mhm.
have the doctor be the face of the organization and hire a COO, someone that's got a lot of association experience and has been through the mill that can come in and sort of keep the organization moving as the new CEO learns what's going on and everything else. So
That's true. And fortunately, that association does usually have a very experienced COO in the
makes a
second
difference.
position there. Because when I worked there, the number 2, as we used to call her, the deputy EVP, she pretty much ran the
Yeah,
association day to day and let the chief staff executive do the policy stuff, because that's really why they had hired him.
right. And that
So
and
that
that makes
balance,
sense for a lot of organizations. And
yeah,
so
it does.
yeah.
But
Well,
it's not the dynamic that we teach in CAE programming, right? There's supposed to be that partnership. You have the chair of the board for the subject matter expertise, and then you have the association professional to run the organization. And I think a lot of us don't understand our body of knowledge, and we all tend to just keep doing what we've been doing. We also, I think, bringing it back to this topic of ageism and this dynamic we have on our teams, we continue to do what we've always done. We continue to silo within our own organization. And I don't mean our organizational silos, but I mean our organization thinks the way we're doing it is the way everybody else is doing it, and it's not. And that's why it's good to encourage the chief staff executive to go out. Why don't you go out to some of these meetings? Why don't you check out this webinar? And it can be a very gentle nudge, like, oh, hey, I saw this webinar you might want to listen to, or here's a podcast you might find interesting, and do it in that way. And that can be helpful too. But I think when we're looking at ageism, I had mentioned at the beginning of the episode, well, some young people feel they are being discriminated against for their age, and that's
Well,
potentially,
I mentioned that too, right? That I thought,
yeah. And
oh,
you,
people think I'm
right,
too
right.
young.
Well, but you said you looked young, not that you
Right,
were
but
young.
that's what put that maybe, yeah, they thought, oh, he's too young, and that was fortunately that was before the days that you had the LinkedIn and you had your photo out there all the time. So, once you got there in person, they saw you, you're like, I don't know, you
It's
know.
like, oh, I
well,
know. It's like,
and I don't know if you want this on the podcast, but Barry, when you and I talked a couple of months ago, I said something about, maybe I'm looking at retirement, and you're like, well, you're probably much younger than I am, and then, yeah, and
Yeah,
when
that's
I told
exactly
you
what
my
I
age, you're
said.
like, wow, it's like, oh wow, no, you're actually older than I am, and so I think a lot of
Because
that
lately I'm like the oldest person in the room generally in most places I go to.
a lot of it's perception and how how you come across, right? And a lot of it is just acting your age, but at the same time knowing that you can still connect with no matter what age group you're dealing with, to be able to connect with people from whether you're 15 or 20 and whether you're 70 and over, so that you have to be able to adjust to the environment you're in.
That's right. And what a lot of executive recruiters share as advice for older job searchers is show energy, show that you know what's going on, show that you're keeping up with technology. And I think one of the wrong ideas that's still hanging on out there is that older people can't use technology. So I countered that with this. Who the heck do you think made all this technology
Oh,
that
that's
you're
good.
using, 24-year-old? It wasn't you, it was Bill Gates, and he's like 75 years old now. So
Yeah.
who do you think made all this technology? Who do you think adapted to it? We weren't born into it, we learned it. And that makes us actually a more valuable asset as a team member because we know how to learn. It wasn't just handed to us. So I'm going to say that because I'm the host and I can get away with it.
So, and Cecilia, the other thing that ties to that is you got a hiring manager that knows that, okay, there's a few people on staff that have been around 25 odd years and they're of a certain age and they're sort of stuck in their ways. And why am I going to hire someone that's the similar age? I'm sure they're stuck in their ways. We're not going to, I mean, that's sort of the attitude. They're not going to be able to bring anything new or learn anything new, which kind of ties to that technology thing too. Um,
But to some extent, I think that is the case in a lot of places where you have employees that
right.
have
Well,
been there
that's
a long
correct.
time and say this is how we've always done it. They don't want change. So when a new person comes in, whether they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s or even older, and figure out a different way, build a better mousetrap, they're not willing to accept that because it's change. So there are people that are not willing to change or adapt. And those are the employees that you really need to think about. And it could be somebody in their 20s or 30s, and it could be somebody older as well. And I think generationally we've learned to adapt to so many different changes in our life and in the world outside, that we bring a different perspective because we have been through the worst of the worst and the best of the best. And so we've got both ends of the spectrum that, if anything, I think as we get older we are able to adapt much better. And I not to bring it back to me, but I've made so many changes in my life in the last 5, 6, 7 years that I'm not sure how much more I can do, but there's always something more you can do. There's always something you can do better. You can be a better writer. You can be a better reader. You can be a better communicator.
Oh,
So
I've
I
got a
think,
list of things, so I can
well,
get better at.
be
And
adaptable.
again, older people understand the need for continual learning and
Exactly.
how to apply it to what we already know.
Yeah.
And I think that makes us, again, 40 up, you have experience, you know how the world works. And I think the point of being young is to get experience and to learn on your own, because we all have to do it the hard way at least twice before we figure it out, right? And
Mhm.
that's what being young's about. And that's why it's good to hire older people and not make an assumption about an individual based on their age.
Right.
Because I was told for many years, oh, young people, they know how to use technology. Let's get young people. And I learned as a manager, supervisor, team leader, all they could do was play with it. They couldn't actually produce any work. And one time I had a staff person who had said, can you create this Excel chart with all this data in there for a project? And he was supposed to get to me by a certain time. And I went to check on him. He was online shopping for cars. And I said, oh, did you
Well,
finish
that's
that
a
Excel
different.
sheet? Because I didn't get it. And he's like, no. He's like, I couldn't figure it out and I got bored. So I just started looking for a new car.
Yeah, that's a whole different issue, I think, because it's
Like,
there's a
what are you talking
there's a
about?
lot to
See,
unpack there.
yeah, a ton. And then I'm just like, technology is useless if you don't know how to use it and you can't produce
Right.
anything.
And that person was obviously too scared to tell you they had no clue how to do it. So,
Well, right. That was probably it because it was somebody who had been a teacher and I gave him a chance to come work at the organization. And he, all he would have had to say is, well, I don't really know how to use Excel. And I could have said, oh, okay, well, let's get you a training course,
Right.
but they, that's an age and experience thing, right? You need to learn from experience about when to ask for help and when to ask questions. And again, Barry, you mentioned something about mentoring earlier. That's why the multi-generational workplace is not just nice, it's a necessity.
Yep.
We need the different age groups on our team so we can all learn from each other. So like older people can learn, new trends, new tech that we may not have heard of yet. And the younger people can learn how to manage things like thought processes, emotional intelligence, things like that, because we can help coach them through some of those things that you only get from life experience. And that makes it a little easier for them.
We sort of touched on this earlier, and I was just thinking about it again in terms of, oh, they're not going to stay very long, this, that, and the other thing. Well, whether it's someone my age or a younger person or anything else, particularly, because you hear about people, people change jobs every a couple of years, and it's a win from my point of view. If I hire someone and they stay 3 years, that's a win these days. And and I think you have to look at it that way. So if I'm of a certain age and you think I'm going to retire in 4 years or 5 years and I stay those 4 or 5 years, that's a win. I mean, it's probably longer than someone else, So I think you have to reorient your head if you're the hiring manager too, and saying, okay, I really need what this person has. And if I get them for 2 or 3 years, that's great because we can get a lot done in that period of time to move the organization forward. And I think that's how you have to look at it.
And the other thing too is that, who makes up these rules? Who makes the rules that when you're 40, you're all of a sudden, you're not a viable candidate for that particular role, or in your 50s, so it's the rules keep changing, the goalpost keeps moving, and so it's, to me, oftentimes I feel like HR or CEOs have to sit back and say, okay, is this, are we changing the rules because it fits our organization, or we want to go from here to here? If you want to go from here to here, then I totally understand that you need to look at your internal, your organizational makeup and say, okay, we need somebody that is better with technology, or we need somebody that has a lot more experience that can help some of these younger generation, right? So that person is going to stay there and they're going to require less time to be trained and they're going to hit the ground running, whereas somebody that's in their 20s or 30s is going to need a lot more. We talked a little bit about this on our call this morning, where Carla was saying, she's somebody's, she went into the office because she wants to help this individual. She wants to be there and hoping that person is going to stay in the role for, 2, 3, 4 years. And so it's also spending the time to help younger people realize that there's so much that they can learn from, somebody that's been working for a long time.
Yeah, that's true.
Go ahead. Let me share a quick story. A number of years ago, I was doing a consulting project, and the organization had opened up a position that was really right for me, and I knew the organization from the consulting and everything else. And the hiring person said to me, we were just having this conversation. Oh, I really want to get someone young in here that can take over for me, when I retire and everything else. And I just looked at that person and I said, okay. And, I did apply for that position. I didn't get it. They hired the younger person. That person's still there, but so was the person that was going to retire. And this was 5 years ago. They have not yet retired. So it's just sort of like, okay, interesting. So you're trying to train this other person and who may eventually leave because you're not yet retiring. That's the other side of the sort of ageism thing, I think, too.
We've also seen where they've hired somebody younger and that person's not stayed in the role for more than a few months because they felt that person's going to bring in energy, bring in this, that, whatever. Then they don't last very long. So then you go back to the drawing board and you hire somebody with a lot more experience, which is what you should have done in the first place.
That's right. So, well, this has been a great conversation, and I know we could talk more about it because, I'll just say it. Ageism against anyone is just wrong. It's not just against the law. It's unethical to judge somebody just by how many years they've been on the planet. So, as Anuja and Barry have both suggested, why don't you open up your mind a little bit to the potential of the individual and not their data demographics, because we're not our demographics. We're much more complex than that. And a lot of people bring a lot of different knowledge and skills, attitudes, senses of humor, which we all need, no matter what's going on in the world around us. It helps us get through the day. So hiring managers, I'm encouraging you, open up your mind to the people who already know the job, already have the experience, already have the knowledge. Don't think younger is better. Fresher is only good when you're looking at meat. Okay, because that's it. If you're cooking, you want fresh, but you want a seasoned person. Just remember, the best wines are the ones that have aged.
I was just going to tell you the same thing. Yep.
Yeah. So Anuja, what's your closing thought, and how can people get in touch with you so they can talk with you about coming to work on their team and membership?
Gosh, closing thought would be, don't look at the individual just because you think that person, don't look at the color of their hair or, their experiences. Look at the individual and what they can do for your organization. What ideas, new ideas, and in some cases, some old ideas they can bring to the table and help your organization grow. And giving individuals an opportunity to do their elevator pitch is a lot more important than not looking at that individual at all, because you might be missing out on a great opportunity, of hiring somebody that can change their trajectory of the organization. You can reach out to me. My email is anujam2015@gmail.com. I'm also on LinkedIn as well.
That's great. Thank you.
For this great opportunity to talk about a subject that I have a feeling we're going to be discussing 10, 20 years from now as well. So,
yeah, I think we always will, unfortunately. But Barry, what's your closing thought, and how can people get in touch with you if they want to add you to their team?
So my closing thought is we all have this unconscious bias within us about age, right? And we don't often realize it, whether we see the photo of the person or we look at that they've been in this organization for 22 years. It's like, oh, okay, you've got to pull yourself out of those things. But we all have that. I've been there. I've done that myself. And you've got to understand that you have these unconscious biasness towards age and other things, and know enough to pull yourself beyond that if you're looking at a really qualified person that doesn't look the same as the things you thought you were looking for. Maybe that's the best way to do that. So keep the open mind, right? Can reach me at bspilson@gmail.com or on my LinkedIn profile. And this has been great.
This is great. Well, I want to thank both of you for having the courage of your convictions to come on and discuss this topic publicly. It's something I've written about on my blog. It's something I've talked with people about. So I really appreciate you both coming on.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you.
So we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next time with another exciting episode. So again, don't forget to follow or subscribe. You don't want to miss any of these conversations. We're having a great year so far. If you'd like to find this podcast and share it with a friend, you can find it on our podcast page at roguetulips.com. Find out what the heck's on my mind this week by checking out the blog. I post a new article every week. Also, if you're interested in CE education for your CAE certification, or you're getting ready for the exam, check out our education page. We're already planning our fall session for the December 2025 exam, so don't miss out on that. So on behalf of Anuja, Barry, and myself, we will see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together. Thanks.